Lotus Temple in Bothell, Washington, just north of Seattle, Washington. And today is January 6th. It is the traditional day in the Christian churches for a celebration or a feast day they call the Epiphany. Now, the Epiphany means a number of things, but one of the things that it means that I want to talk about is the appearance or the visit of the Magi from the east to the Christ child. Now, in customary speaking and tradition, there were three wise men, three Magi, but in fact the Gospel of Matthew, which is the only one of the four Gospels where the visit by the Magi are even mentioned, there are three gifts, and so it was assumed there were three wise men, three Magi, that made those gifts. Now, in that time, no commentary that I know of, not that I've really researched it, but the early Christians and on into the first millennia, I don't think anybody really made much mention or made much about who these three wise men were and where did they come from after all, and what was the significance of that. They followed a star, and that's confused people ever since. I attended one of those places, oh golly, what is it where you go and sit down and they show the stars? Something in Calcutta years ago, where they tried to investigate what was the Star of Bethlehem, and they reversed the course of the stars in the heavens backwards 2,000 years, and could something have appeared in the sky? Well, lots of people have tried to do that, but I don't want to go down that direction. But what I'm saying is, I don't think Christians made much of this story, which is just a couple of lines. You know, the Magi, according to Gospel of Matthew, went to Jerusalem first. And what historians tell us is Jerusalem was quite a center of not just spirituality, Judaism, of course, and Jews from all over the region would come there, but it was a trading center. And historical accounts tell us that Rome in those days had a very thriving trade with India via either the sea routes going further south, through the Red Sea or whatever, or overland. And so it would not have been unusual for traders from India to go back and forth. Yogananda himself endorsed the book about Jesus going to India, Tibet, etc. during his missing 18 years. Nicholas Ivanovich, I'm sorry, I'm not getting the name right, but that he endorsed that. So putting that aside, what I'm saying is that it's very possible that the Magi did in fact come from India, because there was an established connection already between all the way to Rome, but certainly the Eastern Mediterranean. And, they would have spoken Greek in those days. Even though the Romans had conquered the Eastern Mediterranean, the lingua franca of Jesus' time for trade and culture was Greek, because the Greeks had previously conquered the Eastern Mediterranean with the onset of Alexander the so-called Great. So, this is not at all an unusual story. And what do those three wise men represent? Well, the only thing we can say about them is their three gifts, which was, of course, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I don't know much about myrrh or frankincense, but I do believe frankincense is it comes from these little gnarly little bushes, I think, somewhere I associate with Yemen and Somalia and Saudi Arabia, but I should research whether frankincense even comes from India, but no matter. It would have been a costly gift in the entire region, all the way to India. After all, it is used for incense. And so what does this mean to us, the appearance of the Magi in the East? to the Christ child? Well, what it means to us is the suggestion that we too bring costly gifts to the Christ child, to the inner Christ, to the divine soul within each of us. And those three gifts represent three important aspects of our very nature. The first aspect, the gold, which is attributable in ancient times, was the hallmark of kings. I've read a lot about the pharaohs of Egypt, and they were getting gold from further south in Africa, which was quite a lucrative trade to the Africans from which it came. Won't go into that story, but it was symbolic of the power and wealth of kings, is what I'm saying. Nowadays, everybody has gold. In countries like India, gold is a very common thing for families to invest in their jewelry. It's kind of a pre-banking form of wealth. But in ancient times, gold belonged to the kings. And I think of Raja Yoga, kingly yoga. And so it effectively symbolizes what kingship did symbolize, was not just power in the sense of military power, but wisdom, knowledge. And so gold means we should bring to our spiritual path wisdom. And that wisdom, what is implied in that, is that we should seek wisdom from the wise. And that means, in its most traditional form, we should study the scriptures of the wise, the writings of the wise. Best of all, if we can find a person, a live human being who is wise, that's even better. But probably realistically, a combination of the two. We need, therefore, in our spiritual search to search for wisdom and to attune ourselves to wisdom. Why do I bring this up in such a way? I bring this up because just before this broadcast, I had an email conversation with one of our staff members, and we talked about young people and how to attract meditation to young people and the spiritual path even more deeply, rather than just mindfulness meditation being done personally on your cell phone. And it made me think about when I was young and what young people tend to be like. And, they don't necessarily seek wisdom. They are searching for themselves, and they have lots of opinions. They don't have a lot of life experience thus far and are somewhat rebelling against tradition and culture and their elders, if you will. And so, but the wiser ones among the young aren't really young at all, really, in their souls, but the wiser ones do attune themselves to wisdom. I know I certainly searched and read different scriptures of East and West and books about ancient knowledge, the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, and of course the Bible with my upbringing. So that's what the gold represents. The frankincense, of course, is like a perfume, an incense, a beautiful fragrance, and that can only really spiritually represent the quality of the human heart. And that quality is not just for human love or attachment to things or other desires, but of course represents pure love, divine love, unconditional love, which is to say devotion. Now, devotion is not a hallmark characteristic of Western culture, which is very rational and scientific and I'm from Missouri, prove it to me kind of thinking. And whereas other cultures like India, as a good example, there is more heart quality in the soil, more heart quality in the culture. And so for many of us here in the West, being devotional is something we are unfamiliar with, perhaps more than a little bit suspicious of, since it sort of trademarks being fanatical, or at least we don't understand what the usual outward aspects of chant, of devotion represents historically and culturally. But that, something Swami Kriyananda said in my early days with him made a lot of sense to me. He said, dedication to truth, the sincere desire and effort to learn what is true. Dedication is a form of devotion. And so that helped me a lot because I wanted to know what was true. That was uppermost. Devotion was hidden in my early life and has been developed through the practice of meditation and so forth. So that's what the frankincense means, is we don't, because otherwise if we study truth teachings in the way I described a few minutes ago, but lack devotion, then it's just armchair philosophy. We don't really ever do anything. We read book after book, and I read my share of books, although I didn't read that many books. I was fortunate fairly early on in life to sort of have some of that heart quality, knowing it's who I was in myself and what I was feeling. That was more important than what I was thinking. So devotion, frankincense. And myrrh is the bitter herb I understand in my reading is associated with burials and as a preservative, perhaps maybe for food too, I suppose. But in any case, it's bitter. It's a bitter herb. And that bitter herb represents a number of things that are essential on the spiritual path. Those things include the discipline of meditating every day, the discipline, if necessary, to be generous, to be kind, to be compassionate. Some people don't need that to be a discipline, but we get upset or angry or reactive fairly easily, and so we need to discipline the mind, discipline the heart. But it also represents the effort to be even-minded and cheerful under all circumstances. It does represent discipline and developing exercise and a more pure diet and those sorts of things, but really it has to do with staying focused. It has to do with setting sufficient boundaries in your life in terms of where your mind goes and what you look at and the entertainment you bring into your life in order to be first things first, to set priorities on your spiritual path and not sort of just loose your energy in all sorts of directions and relationships that don't go anywhere and don't feed your soul. And on, even how you appear and how you dress, how you walk and how you speak. All of those things should come from and reflect being centered in ourself. And so the bitter herb of that is the discipline that it takes. And more deeply than any of that, of course, is our life is tested through the difficulties and challenges that come to us that otherwise evoke a very intense emotional response, and obviously not a positive one, although the same applies to positive things, getting all excited over nothing, like a dog chasing its tail. But for most of us, the issues have to do with the negative circumstances that come into our lives: disease, illness, betrayal, loss of income, loss of job, etc., etc. And so, we get upset about climate change, we get upset about a lot of things all too easily, traffic, and so on. So the myrrh, the self-discipline of Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirod, the great stanza number 2 of the Yoga Sutras, gives to us the essence of yoga. Remaining even-minded and cheerful, centered in the self within, under all circumstances, both positive but also negative. And so the 3 wise men symbolize this. Who they were, where they came from, so forth is less important. But I want to bring this to a closure by saying that Yogananda said a most curious thing about the 3 wise men. He said that in a prior life they were none other than the 3 yogis, the avatars, who were part of his lineage, which is to say Babaji, Lahiri Mahashai, and his own guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar. Of course, that brings up the question, who is he? What are the implications? If that were true, and no one can prove it, but if it were true, what are the implications that coming from India or somewhere like east of Jerusalem were prior incarnations of these three great avatars to pay homage and respect to the birth of an avatar who would be named Jesus the Christ. What does that mean? Well, when Yogananda was asked why did he spend so much of his teaching and energy and efforts on the two religions of Christianity especially, and Hinduism, especially yoga as an aspect of India's teachings, and all he would say is it was Babaji's wish that I do so. Well, you put those two things together and makes you wonder, could he, Yogananda, have been a reincarnation of Jesus Christ? Well, Swami Kriyananda asked him point blank that in person. He said, what difference would it make? He didn't say no, and he didn't say yes. What difference would it make? Indeed, what difference does it make? Not that much, really. And so the story of the wise men, of the Magi, is a very curious thing, both for its symbolism and so forth, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but also even historically and spiritually in terms of discipleship, in terms of Yogananda, Kriya Yoga. There's a lot there to plumb the depths of. So today is the Feast of Epiphany. The eve was Yogananda's birthday, and this brings to a conclusion for Ananda worldwide, and I think for Christians, many of them, the end of the sacred holiday Christmas season. And so it is. We move on to a new year. Joy and blessings to you.